Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends. Guys, welcome back to r/ProRevenge, where people get exactly what they deserve. And in today's episode, you've got crappy neighbors, dine and dashers, parking spot thieves, all getting taught lessons, and it's a good one. So grab a drink, kick those feet up, and enjoy the stories today. Also, subscribe if you haven't. An email link for story submissions is going to be posted right here. So the other day, my strict manager was in a particularly good mood, and he told us a story and I thought it belonged here. A week or two ago, it was dinner time on a Friday, so like plenty of other restaurants, we were really busy with a long wait. This is when a former employee from a different location comes in to apply for a job. Because of how busy we are, the manager just took her basic information and her resume so he could look her up in the system. He finds out she can't be rehired, per company policy. Despite this, the girl and her friend decide to eat dinner, and not pay. My manager looks over the tapes and he sees the girl applying for the job, walking to the bathroom, and then leaving. A few minutes later, her friend does the same thing. Now, luckily, he has all of her personal information on the resume that she left, as well as the information on her car from the security cameras. So what does my manager do? He calls her back up and apologizes for being so busy, and that maybe she could come back in for an interview with him. She wants to know when, so my boss lies and says that he's leaving on vacation for a couple of weeks, and it would be best if she came back as soon as possible. An hour later, he sees her pull into the parking lot and he calls police. He then sits down with her and conducts an interview like any other. He then excuses himself to go get some availability paperwork, and he comes back with receipts and confronts her about not paying. She immediately starts freaking out, saying her friend told her that she would pay for the meal, and talking about how her friend was always stealing from her, that she shouldn't trust her friend anymore, etc, etc. She then offers to pay for her meal, but says she won't pay for her friend's. My manager tells her that she'll pay for both, or he'll bring the police that he's already called. She then pays for both meals and leaves a nice $5 to $6 tip. She then asks my manager, "Wait, you didn't just bring me in here to have me pay, did you?" My manager tells her, "Of course not. I also brought you back here to tell you that not only will you never work at one of our restaurants again, you are no longer welcome at this location." A lot to go through for a dine and dash, but still amusing, if you ask me. Oh my goodness, guys, I have no idea what that girl was thinking. Yeah, I'm just gonna apply at a job at a restaurant I wanna work at, but also steal from them the same day I drop off my resume. That'll for sure get me hired. Like, guys, I'm literally shaking my head at the fact that she even came back for an interview after she did that. I bought a house a few years ago in a quiet neighborhood. I had wanted to get into that neighborhood for years because my best friend lives there. It was a couple of blocks away from my kids' school as well, and it's a good neighborhood. And then COVID hit. My neighbors across the street fell on some rough times with the pandemic, and they were forced to move before the eviction moratorium was in place. They were really good neighbors. We were friendly with each other, and we were sad to see them go. So when the property owner rented to a new family, we were hoping we could cultivate a friendly relationship. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. About a month after they moved in, the lockdown started, and that's when things went from 0 to 100 real quick. For the next year, every night, there was a huge party. We're talking cars down the street, music blaring so loud you could hear it from every room in the house, just downright obnoxious. We tried to be civil. I asked politely, and I even brought them some beer and offered them some killer 420. Eventually, they threatened me and my wife, so we started calling police. Almost every night for 4 months. We organized with the neighbors, and they started calling police as well. Eventually, the others gave up and they started selling their houses because the renters were just that bad. We were still upside down on our place, so that wasn't an option for us. Eventually, the police told me that I need to stop calling, and that it wasn't their issue to deal with. They told me I was a bigger nuisance than the renters' music. It was at that time that the housing market was taking off. Houses were selling in my area for $40,000 to $50,000 over appraisal value. My wife and I looked at what we needed to make, so we could move, and then we listed our home for that. In 3 days, we had a handful of offers to choose from, but it was the lowest offer that stood out the most. Their offer was a good $20,000 under the next lowest, but they sent a letter. Now, I'm a sucker for a letter, especially one with a picture of a young pregnant couple and a dog, and a patrol car. So it turns out the young man is a police officer, newly appointed at the local police department, and he takes his patrol car home. I knew at that point that this was the family to sell my house to, money be damned. I moved out as the neighbors were throwing a huge party, and the next day, the police moved in, and they haven't had another party since. I drive by regularly on my way to my buddy's place, and they just sit quietly in their garage, looking bored. I make sure to honk and wave every single time. Guys, I love and hate this at the same time. On one hand, OP finally got the revenge on those stupid renters and their obnoxious parties. But on the other hand, it only got resolved because he sold this place to a cop. And here I was thinking that all this time, if you called in a noise complaint, the police would deal with it. I guess not. So I'm living in Japan now, and people here ride bicycles a lot. You can't leave your bike anywhere, and you have to pay for parking, between $1 and $2 per day. There's also very few parking areas for bicycles. Most people leave their bikes at the same place, so they pay monthly, because it's cheaper and you have your own space. So this started a couple of weeks ago. Someone in my building started having a guest who decided to steal my bicycle parking space whenever they came to visit. Sometimes they stayed the whole night, so I had to go to the station, pay $1, and come all the way home walking, which meant I would need to walk back to the station the next day, which is a 20-minute walk. Now, all the bicycle spaces do have a number, which means they're reserved for someone. Mine happens to be number 105, but this idiot decides to take mine whenever he comes to visit. The second time this happened, I told the building manager, but they didn't do anything. The third time I saw the bicycle there, I left a note in Japanese saying, "Please don't leave your bicycle here. This is my space and I'm using it every day." I found the note taped to my parking space, and it had a couple of bad words in Japanese at the end. Basically, he was not only stealing my space, but he was making fun of me by insulting me. Now, I probably wouldn't have done anything about it if he hadn't written those words. This triggered me and it got the worst in me. The person did it again a couple of times, so I knew this would continue. I suddenly had a great idea. I bought one of the thickest bike locks they had at the store and decided to try its efficiency. I was thinking about buying another bicycle, a better, more expensive one that I could use to go on cycling trips, so a good chain or lock was needed anyway. I then locked his bicycle the next time I saw it there. The bike hasn't moved for the last 7 days. There were 2 notes. The first one was a very aggressive one, with more bad words and threats about going to police, which I didn't care. Let's go that way as it's my spot. The second note days later was an apology, and they begged for me to unlock the bike because they tried to break it, but they couldn't. I guess he's learned his lesson. Now, I'm pretty sure he won't do it again, but I just want to enjoy this feeling of victory for a couple of days more. I'll free it in 2 to 3 days, I guess. Guys, the bicycle lock thing was brilliant. Now, I personally think OP should have left another note, telling that person that they need to pay for using that space before he unlocks his bike. So back in my college days, I slaved away flipping burgers under the good old golden arches to help pay for my tuition. Now, it wasn't a terrible job. All of my coworkers were great people. Well, almost all of my coworkers. There were these 2 guys, let's call them Brian and Jerry, who were pretty much known as the workplace idiots, who would always pick on people. Both these goons had been at the same place for several years, and thus they felt like they had the right to taunt and outright sabotage new crew members. The rest of us had been around long enough to push back and tell these guys off, so they left us alone. We did what we could to protect the newbies that fell under Brian and Jerry's wrath, but we couldn't always be there for them. The things they did to new hires included 1. Walking over and clearing the order screen before the newbies had time to see what needed to be made, causing them to fall behind on orders. 2. Changing settings on the grills and fryers when the newbies weren't looking, so the food wouldn't cook properly, or not at all. 3. Tampering with the condiment dispensers in various ways. 4. Dirtying equipment at the end of the shift so the newbies would have to clean it again. And 5. Of course, all the usual name-calling, taunting, etc. As you can imagine, these antics greatly slowed down the drive-thru times and genuinely hurt us as a store. This was all brought up to the managers, but nothing was ever done. The goons would get a stern but spineless talking to once in a while, and that was it. Brian and Jerry had worked there forever, considered themselves the head workers or whatever, and management probably didn't want to bother hiring a new set of staff, even though a well-trained monkey could do this. A lot of new hires quit after a few days and blamed it on the 2, and I can't say I blame them. There was this one crew member in particular, though, who stuck around despite getting the worst of it from them. We'll call him Lance. Lance was a good guy. He was always very pleasant and good to work with, even when Brian and Jerry tormented him. There were times, though, that they got to him. One night, I found Lance sitting on the hood of his car with his head in his hands after a particularly brutal round of sabotage. The two had cleared his order screen multiple times before he could read it, and a lot of angry customers came inside with messed up orders, yelling and complaining. Now, Lance didn't strike me as a crying man, but you could tell that he was just barely holding it together. I asked if he was okay, and we talked for a little bit. Lance said not to worry about it because he was gonna get the last laugh against these two, but he wouldn't elaborate further. We went back inside, and I told those two idiots to stop messing around with others, and they just snickered as usual. They knew they were virtually immune to discipline unless they straight up committed murder. Lance stuck around for about 6 more months. A pretty typical tour of duty for a college town, and then he moved on to pursue other career interests, as he told me. I did miss him, and we stayed in touch for a bit. I ended up transferring to a university the next town over, which also meant transferring to another McDonald's as well. Little did I know, vengeance was coming. Fast forward to my last day at that particular McDonald's. I had just come in for my shift along with Brian and Jerry. It was a bit early, so I sat in the dining area and I played on my phone for a bit before it was time to clock in. I then feel a tap on my shoulder, and I looked up to see my old buddy Lance, who was, to my surprise, wearing a manager's uniform. I say to him, "Hey, Lance, moving up in the world I see." Lance just smiled and said that he'd been promoted to assistant manager at another store in the franchise, but he had come back to take care of some things. I noticed an older man was standing behind him in a full suit, who Lance introduced me to as his uncle, the franchise owner. Lance was the franchise owner's nephew. The whole time he was doing grunt work and getting picked on by the goons, he was the franchise owner's effing nephew. At that point, my justice boner stiffened, and my heart rate went up a few notches. I knew something was about to go down. Lance and the owner disappeared behind the counter. I wasn't privy to what happened back there with the goons, but of course I asked later what happened. When Lance told his uncle everything that had gone down, he asked Lance to stick around and keep a log of everything. The goons, after getting an eyeful of Lance in a manager uniform, and being informed of his relation to the franchise owner, shat their collective pants. Not only were they being terminated, they were facing the possibility of legal action for all the stunts they pulled. Something about affecting profits and staff turnover. Jerry couldn't bear to look Lance in the eye, and Brian began to beg for his job. Lance then proceeded to tell them that they were the two most useless employees that he's ever seen in his entire life. And as their superior, he was personally firing them and barring them from any further employment with the company. When I learned this, I was smiling from ear to ear. On top of that, Lance put in a good word for me with the owner. So if I ever wanted a pay increase or a promotion at my new location, it would most likely be mine. I worked at the other McDonald's for 8 months with an extra $1 per hour before graduating and getting a college job. But I never forgot about those bullies and Lance. The dude must have had incredible self-control to report to work and put up with them, knowing that his uncle would be getting him a manager job anyway. Sadly, I didn't keep up with Lance, so I never found out if the two were taken to court. And I'd like to think that as former fry cooks at a fast food joint, they were probably unable to pay up, landing them in a place where they'd undoubtedly fit in just fine, which is jail. Guys, all I can say is I'm loving that revenge, and I would have loved to have seen the faces of those two idiots when Lance walked in as their boss. I do have a question though, are franchise owners of McDonald's not involved in the day-to-day running of the stores? I only ask that because if I was the franchise owner, those two would have been canned the first few times they were caught messing around. And I'd also be looking into why the manager was continuing to let that kind of behavior happen for years. Because as franchise owner, you gotta look out for your employees, right? So my daughter, who's 15, has been friends with a girl who lives opposite for years now. And in the past, there's been sleepovers at both of our houses, and adults always stopped and chatted when we saw each other. Last year, my daughter comes out as a lesbian, and a short while later, we noticed that our friends across the road never seemed to want to chat anymore. Recently, my daughter told me that her friend had messaged her to say that she wasn't allowed in our house anymore. Yesterday, I saw the husband and wife on the road, and I decided that I was gonna have a friendly chat to see if I could resolve the issue as they were pretty good friends, and it didn't stay friendly for long. The dad was acting oddly agitated when I brought it up, and he ends up saying, "Hey, I'm not letting your effing daughter try to do stuff to my daughter. Just because you raised a freak doesn't mean we all have to like it." Now, for the next part, it's important to know 4 things. 1. Dickhead Dad has been working from home since the pandemic started. 2. His wife hasn't, and she works every day. 3. I've been working from home due to an injury for a few weeks now. And 4. I've seen a woman who visits for a few hours a couple of times a week, and I've seen him smack her butt as she leaves. At this point, I just stay nice and calm. I take a breath, and then I press the button. I then calmly explain to Dad that just because my daughter's gay doesn't mean she'd be trying to make a move on a friend. After all, I say, men and women can be friends without it being sexual. Just like you and that blonde girl who keeps coming around. Upon hearing that, he instantly turned pale and got pretty mad and called me some amazing names as his wife just stomps back in their house. I'm guessing things got pretty bad as he left the house less than an hour later with a suitcase and a big gym bag, and he drove off, tires screeching. Now, I do feel sorry for the daughter, if I'm honest. And for her, I did wish afterwards that I'd kept my mouth shut. Not sorry for him though. That was a huge oof right there, guys. I love how OP basically destroyed that man with one line. And honestly, it would have come to light sooner or later. OP just hit that button that basically sent everything crashing down in an instant. And hey, if you're an a-hole neighbor who's got some secrets, it might be in your best interest to be nice to all of your neighbors, because you never know who's keeping an eye on you. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of our /ProRevenge. Guys, I hope you enjoyed these super satisfying stories today. If you did, hit that thumbs up. And if you missed the last episode on the channel, an entitled Karen and her family trespass repeatedly to swim in a private pool, and they learn a painful and, I guess, irritating lesson. Check it out if you haven't, and myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.